Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving deep into a truly unique corner of contemporary literature, the world of Haruki Murakami. This is a writer who has he's completely transcended borders. His work is available in over 50 languages globally, sells millions of copies, and yet he remains this kind of enigmatic figure, a global phenomenon who, for a time, essentially went into self-exile because he became, well, too famous in his own country.
That duality is the perfect starting point. I'm glad you brought that up because it really does define his entire career. He created a path that was just completely separate from the traditional established Japanese literary world.
Right.
So you have this figure who, by some really powerful critics in his home country, is called an outcast. He's called un-Japanese because of all these perceived Western influences. Yet, this is the same writer who produced what a major national survey called the best-ranked work of Japan's entire Heisei era.
And that's 1Q84.
The sprawling 3-volume epic 1Q84. So the mission of this deep dive is, to really unpack that paradox, to show how his unconventional life, from being a jazz bar owner to a marathon runner, directly shapes the specific, really potent knowledge nuggets you find in his novels.
Absolutely. And for you, the learner, what's so fascinating here is the sheer breadth of the source material we're pulling together. We're covering his humble beginnings running a jazz bar, the single instantaneous moment an idea hit him at a baseball game, the signature magical realism that defines his style, his intense commitment to running, and maybe most surprisingly, his powerful, outspoken political stances that came out later in his life. We're connecting all the dots. The biographical facts, his different literary periods, the core stylistic analysis, major awards, and his profound political commitments. It's a full picture of a 21st century master, and we want to deliver those surprising facts and insights that really define his unconventional path.
To begin that journey, we really have to look at his foundation, because it immediately sets him apart from, well, most of his contemporaries. Murakami was born in Kyoto in 1949, and then he was raised near Kobe. He was an only child, which is a detail I think is pretty crucial when we start considering the solitary nature of his characters later on.
And the family background, it's almost ironically academic and traditional, which is what makes his whole literary path feel so rebellious. His parents were both teachers of Japanese literature, so he was completely immersed in the very tradition he would later almost aggressively reject.
Exactly. He absorbed the surrounding Japanese culture, of course, but his intellectual and his creative nourishment came almost entirely from overseas. This is where we see that intense influence of Western culture, starting in childhood with Russian music and then just rapidly expanding to European and American literature. And this wasn't just a passing interest for him, it was foundational to his whole worldview.
We're talking about an author whose formative reading list was not the Japanese classics, but a global syllabus. You've got Franz Kafka, Gustave Flaubert, Charles Dickens, Kurt Vonnegut.
Fyodor Dostoevsky, Richard Brautigan, Jack Kerouac.
It's this diet of Western authors, especially those American post-war novelists and their Russian masters, that just fundamentally distinguished him. He wasn't looking inward to the Japanese literary tradition. He was looking globally. He was looking for themes of alienation, of existential searching, and he found that all over American literature.
And that point is absolutely central to the un-Japanese criticism he faced. When the literary gatekeepers in Tokyo looked at Murakami, they saw a writer who sounded like, a foreign transplant. He was using sentence structures and narrative techniques that felt borrowed from California or New York, not from Kyoto or Tokyo.
So his early work just didn't have that emphasis on collective identity or the kind of domestic family drama that was so characteristic of the established Japanese literary output.
Not at all.
And this leads us directly to that famous period of his life that truly defined his aesthetic, the jazz bar years. Before becoming this globally recognized author, he was a student of drama at Waseda University. He took a first job at a record store, and then, with his wife, Yoko Takahashi, they decided to jump into entrepreneurship.
That pivot happened when they opened Peter Cat. It was a coffee house and jazz bar in Kokubunji, Tokyo. And this is from 1974 to 1981. It wasn't just some brief stint. Running that bar consumed 7 years of his life. The sources really emphasized that his wife, Yoko, actually had more business acumen than he did when they started out.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it suggests a partnership that was really built on a shared commitment to this very unconventional lifestyle.
And what's also notable is their life decision during this period. They decided not to have children. That choice, combined with the rigorous solitary schedule of running a small business, it created this very focused, insular environment. It was an existence dedicated to music and the demands of their own enterprise. I have to wonder, did running Teeter Cat prepare him for the long, solitary work of writing?
Oh, absolutely. It provided a context for intense observation.
Mm.
He wasn't participating in the standard salaryman life, nor was he embedded in those traditional academic literary circles. He was constantly surrounded by music, which he adored, and people. But his job was to manage the space, to be the quiet observer.
Right.
And that duality, the noise of the bar and the solitude of managing it, is a perfect metaphor for the inner world of his typical protagonist.
Detached, observant, yet surrounded by all this complex life.
Exactly.
And that passion for music, which was sparked by seeing Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers in Kobe when he was, what, 15?
Around 15, yeah. It's legendary.
Yeah.
He originally aspired to be a musician, but he very candidly admitted he just wasn't skilled enough to play instruments well. So instead, music became his narrative blueprint. It's not just background noise in his books, it's structural.
It's the rhythm and the counterpoint of his storytelling.
It really is. I mean, think about jazz improvisation. You have a clear theme, but then you take off on a tangent, a solo that explores something unexpected, only to smoothly return to the established chord progression.
That is precisely how Murakami's plots work.
Yes, they start grounded, then they spiral into the surreal, but always with an underlying structure, a rhythm that's often dictated by the musical reference in the background.
And all of this background, the Western books, the jazz bar, the self-imposed solitude, it all culminated in probably the most famous origin story in modern literature, the baseball game Epiphany. This is where his entire life just pivoted at age 29.
It's such an extraordinary nugget of knowledge because it completely deromanticizes the writing process while at the same time giving it this divine spark. Murakami himself described his life up to that point as being just one of those ordinary people. In 1978, he's watching the season opener at Jingu Stadium in Tokyo. He's a big fan of the Tokyo Yakult Swallows.
And the moment is so specific, you feel like you were there. He recounts the American hitter Dave Hilton hitting a double, and as the bat made contact, he felt a warm sensation hit him. Realizing with absolute certainty, I think I can write a novel. It wasn't a slow realization. It was a sudden, a seismic shock.
It was. He went home that very night and began his first novel, Hear the Wind Sing. But what needs to be emphasized here is the absolute dedication this required. He wasn't suddenly a full-time author.
Yep.
He worked on it for 10 months in these brief, exhausted stretches during the nights after closing the jazz bar and finishing all his other duties. So this origin story is as much about sudden inspiration as it is about the sustained, solitary commitment it took to execute that inspiration while juggling real-world responsibilities.
And that very first novel, despite being written in these stolen moments, won the Gunzo Prize for New Writers. It immediately validated this impulsive decision and gave him the platform that would launch a truly international career. It's the ultimate narrative of the accidental author who just bypassed the entire traditional Japanese literary apprenticeship process purely on the strength of an idea born at a baseball game.
So his career begins with that immediate validation, the Gunzo Prize for Hear the Wind Sing. The initial phase of his career is really focused on what critics now call the trilogy of the rat.
And this sequence provides the foundational building blocks of his style. It's made up of Hear the Wind Sing, which was 1979, Pinball, 1973 and 1980, and then the novel that really cemented his trajectory, A Wild Sheep Chase in 1982. All three of them center on the same unnamed narrator and his friend, who is referred to only as the Rat.
And it's crucial to understand his own critical distance from his initial efforts. Murakami considered the first two novels, Hear the Wind Sing and Pinball, 1973, to be immature and even flimsy. He felt he was still finding his literary language.
Right.
He famously wrote the first one in this highly constrained, simple Japanese, almost as if he were translating his thought process directly from English to find a voice that was uniquely his own and distinct from the Japanese literary establishment.
And that harsh self-assessment had real, concrete consequences for international readers. He delayed their wide mainstream English translation until 2015. He wanted readers to focus on his more mature work.
Right. While an earlier English edition did exist, translated by Alfred Birnbaum, it was primarily for Japanese students learning English.
A neat detail.
Yeah, but it speaks to his control over his own legacy, waiting until he felt the work was really ready for global critique.
But the true breakthrough came with the third in the trilogy, A Wild Sheep Chase. This is the moment he realized he was onto something big.
Yes. He described it as the first book where I could feel a kind of sensation, the joy of telling a story. This novel successfully blended the realism of the earlier works, the bar atmosphere, the loneliness, with the elements that would become his trademark.
The quest narrative, the surreal landscape, and the disappearing mysterious characters.
It was the first time that the music, the Western hardboiled genre, and his emerging magical realism really harmonized.
That blending of genre was successful for sure, but the novel that completely shattered his anonymity and shifted his entire personal life was Norwegian Wood. Published in 1987, this book was an absolute cultural phenomenon in Japan.
It was a massive national success because it was such a departure. Unlike the Rat trilogy, which was surreal and stylized, Norwegian Wood was grounded, nostalgic, and deeply emotional. It focused on themes of loss, memory, and sexuality in a way that just resonated profoundly with young Japanese readers, moving millions of copies almost overnight.
So, if A Wild Sheep Chase was the literary breakthrough, Norwegian Wood was the celebrity explosion. And the consequence of that sudden, intense fame is staggering.
It forced him out of the country. The sources state that the novel propelled the formerly quiet Murakami into such an intense spotlight that he became an overwhelming celebrity. This led to his actual departure from Japan in 1986, even before Norwegian Wood was published, because he was anticipating the coming storm.
Wow.
He was, to use the phrase, literally mobbed at airports after the book came out.
So he went into a self-imposed exile that lasted for years. He traveled through Europe, lived in the United States, and took up these prestigious fellowships at places like Princeton, Tufts, and Harvard.
And this geographic and cultural detachment was essential for him. It allowed him to write works like South of the Border, West of the Sun, and the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle without that suffocating glare of celebrity back home. He basically traded local Japanese fame for global intellectual engagement.
And during the same period of profound literary output and physical displacement, he solidified his other massive public persona, the dedicated, solitary, long-distance runner. It's a fact that surprises a lot of readers. He didn't start running until he was 33, after he began writing.
Yeah, as a necessary counterpoint to the sedentary, rigorous schedule of the jazz bar in his new writing life.
So why is running so essential? Is it just a hobby for him, or is it fundamentally intertwined with his craft?
It became an extreme commitment, reflecting the discipline required for his creative life. It mirrors the intense solitude and the relentless persistence that's required to produce his lengthy, complex novels.
And we're not talking about casual jogs here.
Not at all. Yeah. In 1996, he completed his first ultramarathon. That's a staggering 100-kilometer race around Lake Soroma in Hokkaido. That physical rigor, the pain, the mental commitment, it's the perfect analog for the lonely, often painful process of wrestling a complex narrative onto the page.
That's a powerful connection. If the writing process is guided by the mysterious automatic dwarfs, which we'll get to soon, the running process is guided entirely by his conscious will. It's the counterbalance.
Precisely. And he beautifully connected these two aspects of his life in his 2007 memoir, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running.
And you have to appreciate the literary lineage right there in the title.
Oh, absolutely. It's a direct, knowing play on Raymond Carver's collection, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love.
It's a subtle signal to the reader that this nonfiction book about miles and sweat is actually about the craft of storytelling. That level of discipline, running a marathon every year, getting up early every day to write for exactly 4 hours, whether he feels inspired or not, it seems central. It allowed him, the quiet jazz club owner, to manage the chaos that global fame brought and to maintain his creativity in exile. The running is the structure that allows the surreal narrative to exist.
And it serves a practical purpose, too. He maintains that routine allows him to channel the deep concentration needed for writing these complex, multi-layered stories without breaking down physically or mentally. When you read about the physical struggle in his memoir, you realize it's the foundational discipline that makes the artistic risk in his fiction possible.
Now we arrive at the core of his distinctive voice. The style itself. It's dense, it's philosophical, it's funny, and it's utterly strange. Critics often label it magical realism or surrealism, but this labeling is central to the critique he faced in Japan.
Yes. The overview firmly places him in the camp of magical realism, featuring those signature surreal elements. Stylistically, he often leans on the framework of the Japanese I-novel tradition through his use of a distinct first-person narrative. However, we should pause here and really define that tradition for the learner.
That's necessary context. What exactly is an I-novel?
The I-novel, or chusetsusu, is a form of autobiographical Japanese literature. It's often intensely focused on the author's internal life, detailing their personal, domestic, and family sphere. It requires a profound level of sincerity and self-exposure.
So it's very intimate and inward-looking.
Very. And Murakami's usage takes this form, the first-person narrator, but completely subverts the content.
So if I'm getting this right, the Japanese literary establishment's complaint was that while he used the form, the intense first-person voice, the content was all wrong.
Precisely.
It was criticized as un-Japanese because the emotional landscape was too Western, too detached, and too influenced by American pop culture and surreal European writers.
Exactly. His protagonists value freedom, solitude, and intellectual exploration over the intimacy and collective responsibility that are so inherent in the traditional I novel, which often elevates the family unit. Murakami's response to this sustained criticism was to proudly claim the label of black sheep, just embracing his outsider status.
And he also pushed back against the technical classification itself. He doesn't see his work as surrealism or magical realism in the defined literary sense. What's his counterargument?
He views the narrative as an organic, natural flow. When asked, Murakami said that he simply writes the stories he wants to write in a style that suits him. He compares the narrative flow to flowing water following the lay of the land. For him, the sudden appearance of a talking cat or a trip down a mysterious well isn't a magical trick. It's simply the most logical thing to happen next in the story he's unfolding. He sees his job as faithfully putting that spontaneous, sometimes illogical, flow into words.
That comparison, flowing water, is brilliant. It reframes the surreal as simply inevitable. It means the strange events aren't intrusions on reality, but essential components of this reality.
And if the style is flowing water, the structure is often provided by music. This is the second major component of his aesthetic. The influence of Peter Cat is everywhere, not just thematically, but structurally, in both classical and popular music.
We see this most clearly when he uses music to title and frame his larger works. Take the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, for example. The three major sections of the novel are titled The Thieving Magpie, which is the title of an opera by Rossini, Bird as Prophet, a reference to a piano piece by Schumann, and The Birdcatcher, a character in Mozart's The Magic Flute.
That detailed classical framing is so significant. It's not just an illusion, it's providing a hidden scaffolding. Rossini's opera deals with suspicion and public outcry. Schumann's piece is about elusive beauty and isolation, and Mozart's work is about the journey through trials toward enlightenment. By structuring the book this way, he signals the underlying thematic concerns to the reader, even as the plot descends into wartime history and trips down dry wells.
And then there's the pop influence, which is perhaps more recognizable to his wider audience. Norwegian Wood comes directly from the Beatles.
Dance Dance takes its title from song by the Dells.
And South of the Border, West of the Sun is also named after a song. These titles act as these cultural anchors, providing a bit of familiarity before the narrative takes the reader into the unknown.
And often the music itself acts as a kind of portal or an emotional mnemonic device. When a character plays a specific piece of music, it's often a cue for a memory, a shift in atmosphere, or even the arrival of a surreal element. It's the most reliable constant in an unreliable world.
Now, let's look at the characters and the creative mechanism that produces them. His protagonists, as we noted, are often detached, prioritizing freedom and solitude, but the sources give us the most incredible insight into how these characters come to life through what he called the automatic dwarfs.
This concept is maybe the greatest nugget of knowledge about his creative life. When asked about where his characters originate, he clarified that almost none of them are based on real life. Instead, he described the subconscious process of pulling fragments from his brain to weave a person together using this evocative term, the automatic dwarfs.
The automatic dwarfs. It sounds like a title for one of his own short stories. What does he mean by this? Is he suggesting his creative process is entirely passive?
Not passive, but automatic like a subconscious assembly line. He clarifies that these characters are formed by an internal, autonomous process. And here's where it gets really interesting. He says that once these characters are assembled and alive in a literary sense, they eventually break free of the writer's control and begin to act independently.
Wow.
He views writing almost like creating his own film, just for himself, where he experiences the story as it unfolds, often noting how strange the story presents itself, just like his characters do in the narrative itself.
If he lets the dwarfs run the show, though, doesn't that undermine the intense discipline he displays through running and his daily writing? Isn't that a contradiction?
That is the beautiful paradox of the creative mind. The running provides the vessel, the disciplined, healthy container, while the dwarfs provide the content. His 4 hours of disciplined writing every morning is simply the time he dedicates to listening to what the dwarfs have been up to overnight. He's the transcriber of his own subconscious.
Right.
This system allows him to blend the mundane reality, man looking for his wife's cat, with the utterly absurd, like a 6-foot-tall talking frog.
And that absurdity is balanced by his unique brand of humor, which is essential to making the surreal palatable. The anecdote about Super Frog Saves Tokyo is perfect for this.
Yes, in that story, the protagonist is confronted with a 6-foot-tall frog discussing the imminent destruction of Tokyo over a cup of tea. He stated that he believes readers should be entertained and amused even when approaching a serious existential subject like mass destruction. The humor provides a necessary emotional release valve, preventing the surrealism from collapsing into, mere pretension.
Okay, so for the first decade and a half of his career, especially during his time in exile, Murakami was largely seen as this introspective writer. He was focused on the internal journeys of alienated loners. But the sources clearly delineate a turning point in the mid-1990s, a documented shift from detachment to profound commitment.
And this shift wasn't abstract. It was explicitly confirmed by Murakami himself. In a 1996 conversation with the psychologist Hayao Kawai, he stated that his position had changed to one of commitment. He said it was catalyzed by his experiences living in the U.S. and the traumatic events he witnessed back home. He identified the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, published in 1995, as the novel that marked this transition.
And the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle is the perfect testament to that change. It fully fuses the realism and the fantastic, but for the first time, it integrates this powerful element of social and historical consciousness. It moves beyond the personal quest of finding a missing cat and delves into the collective memory of Japan's dark past.
Specifically, it deals with the sensitive and often avoided topic of war crimes committed by the Japanese military in Manchukuo, which is northeast China, during World War II.
Why was this, a subject historically sidelined by his generation of writers, the one he chose to pivot on?
It was a very conscious decision to confront the wall of historical amnesia. His time abroad gave him a perspective that was outside the Japanese bubble. When he returned, he chose to weave this historical trauma into the narrative of fantasy, suggesting that the surreal elements of the present are just inextricably linked to the unaddressed chaos of the past. And the novel's success demonstrated that this committed stance really resonated.
And it was acknowledged by the literary establishment that he had once shunned. The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle won the Yomiuri Prize, which is hugely significant because the award was personally given by Kenzaburusha.
A Nobel Prize laureate who had previously been one of Murakami's most vocal critics.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an acknowledgement from the highest levels of the establishment that The Black Sheep had produced a work of undeniable national importance.
And this commitment was then solidified when he returned to Japan in the mid-90s, where the nation was reeling from these dual tragedies, the 1995 Kobe earthquake and, crucially, the horrific Aum Shinrikyo sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway system.
He felt compelled to respond, not just as an artist, but as a chronicler.
His response to the sarin gas attack was immediate and profound, leading him to his first work of nonfiction, Underground, in 1997. This wasn't a philosophical essay, it was a grueling, expansive oral history.
That book required immense commitment. It was based on extensive interviews with the victims of the sarin attacks, the people whose lives were instantly and unjustly shattered by a psychotic system. He spent months meticulously documenting their stories.
But what makes Underground so structurally important is that he also interviewed members of the Aum Shinrikyo cult who perpetrated the attacks.
Yes, providing a really disturbing dual perspective on the events, exploring the motives of those who constructed the wall.
He wasn't just speculating about chaos, he was documenting the fragile, unique souls, the eggs that had been broken against the wall of the system. And his subsequent fiction, the short story collection After the Quake, also dealt with these raw collective events, showing how large public tragedies ripple through individual lives.
It signaled an era where the isolation of his earlier characters was complicated by inescapable national reality.
This commitment then extended to his explicit political stance, which he articulated most famously in his acceptance speech for the Jerusalem Prize in 2009. He framed himself as an artist who needed to stand against the system, aligning himself philosophically with George Orwell.
Right, though he continues to avoid explicitly stating political messages in his fiction. His goal is to maintain the artistic integrity while providing the moral framework.
And this brings us to the egg in the wall metaphor, which is arguably his most critical political statement and his most recognized nonfiction insight globally. We need to spend some time on this.
It is the encapsulation of his humanism. In that speech, he stated, "If there is a hard, high wall and an egg that breaks against it, no matter how right the wall or how wrong the egg, I will stand on the side of the egg.
And he defined the wall as.
The system which forces us to do the things we would not ordinarily see fit to do as individuals. The egg, in contrast, is the tangible living soul, the fragile, unique individual.
What's fascinating is how this overtly political moral statement squares with his historical reluctance to include explicit politics in his fiction. It seems contradictory.
It's the difference between a direct editorial statement and a philosophical foundation.
Mm.
He provides the moral rule in the speech, but he allows the fiction to demonstrate the principle in action.
Ah, I see.
His detached characters, who are always searching for authenticity and meaning, they become the eggs. When they encounter institutional power, societal pressure, or historical trauma, the walls, the reader understands where the author's sympathy lies without him having to write a manifesto.
He has consistently applied this philosophy to global issues. Regarding Japan's wartime past, he has stressed that Japan must continue to apologize for its wartime aggressions until the aggrieved countries say they have apologized enough.
Right. He noted that Japanese people tend not to have an idea that they were also assailants, pointing to a continued need for national reflection.
And he brought this clarity to contemporary international disputes as well. When his books were temporarily removed from sale in China following intense anti-Japanese demonstrations in 2012, he immediately criticized the overwrought nationalism.
He characterized it as cheap liquor that politicians feed to the public. He stood against the nationalist sentiment of both nations in favor of individual conscience.
That's a strong political statement for a writer often characterized as a recluse. He also weighed in directly on national issues, criticizing Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, saying Suga saw an exit from the crisis only because his eyes must be extremely good for his age, implying a blindness to the true depth of the problem.
He also champions progressive social issues, notably lending his support to same-sex marriage, which isn't nationally recognized in Japan.
And his engagement continued most recently during the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. He prepared a special radio program with about 10 musical pieces that encouraged peace and a focus on the preciousness of life. So his commitment is clearly not just literary, but civic.
The output during this committed period includes some of his most recognized global works. Kafka on the Shore from 2002 won the World Fantasy Award in 2006. And of course, 1Q84 from 2009-2010, pronounced Ichikyu Hachiyon, the same as 1984.
Which became a global phenomenon and led to that best-ranked work status back home.
Even his later works continue to cause cultural friction, which proves the ongoing power of his themes.
Definitely. Killing Commendator in 2017 caused major controversy in Hong Kong, where government censors labeled it Class 2 indecent.
Wow. What did that mean in practice?
It led to mass censorship, requiring warning labels and restricting sales to people under 18. That kind of reaction so late in his career, it just underscores how challenging his exploration of sexuality, reality disruption, and anti-authoritarianism remains for certain systems.
And his most recent novel, The City and Its Uncertain Walls, from 2023, which was based on an unsatisfactory 1980 novella, shows him still processing current events through his surreal lens.
Indeed. He explicitly connected the physical setting of the walled town in that novel to the modern experience of the pandemic. He noted that the walled environment was a metaphor for the worldwide lockdown, reflecting the difficult coexistence of extreme isolation and warm feelings of empathy. Even in his latest work, the personal quest is constantly interacting with the collective global crisis.
The power of Murakami's unique storytelling is that it translates exceptionally well across media. His narratives, mixing the mundane with the fantastic, have made him one of the most adapted living authors.
It began early. Hear the Wind Sing was adapted into a film way back in 1981, and short stories like Bakery Attack were quickly made into films. But the recent cinematic successes have truly defined his global influence for a new generation of non-readers.
Films like Tony Takitani in 2004 and Norwegian Wood in 2010 brought his emotional depth to the screen. But the watershed moment really came with films that proved the versatility of his shorter fiction.
Burning, from 2018, the South Korean film adapted from his short story Barn Burning was highly acclaimed internationally. It won the Fapreshi International Critics Prize. It showed that his work could be transplanted to completely different cultural contexts while retaining its central mystery and tension.
But the adaptation that truly blew up was Drive My Car in 2021. This film became a global darling, winning the Academy Award for Best International Feature and receiving nominations for Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay.
What's so critical about Drive My Car is the complexity of its source material. The director, Ryusuke Hamaguchi, didn't just adapt to the title story.
Right.
He wove together elements from several Murakami short stories, like Scheherazade and Kino, and combined them with structural inspiration from Anton Chekhov's play Uncle Vanya. It proved that Murakami's emotional and thematic layers are so rich that they could be disassembled and reassembled into an entirely new, complex narrative structure.
The sources also list extensive theatrical adaptations, which really speaks to the visual and thematic strength of his work. We see the 2003 play The Elephant Vanishes, which blended multimedia and physical theater to capture his surreal atmosphere.
And playwright Frank Galati adapted major works like After the Quake and Kafka on the Shore for the stage in the late 2000s, turning that internal journey into a public performance.
And his ecosystem just continues to evolve with modern formats.
Yeah, the adventure video game Memoranda was released in 2017, based on various short stories. And demonstrating his enduring appeal to diverse audiences, there's a 3-volume original English-language manga series that started in 2023.
Oh, that's cool.
It adapts 9 of his most famous short stories, including Super Frog Saves Tokyo.
Moving from the popular ecosystem to his academic and personal legacy, he recently made a huge contribution to his alma mater, Waseda University, essentially cementing the physical archive of his entire unconventional life.
Yes. In 2021, the Waseda International House of Literature, often just called the Haruki Murakami Library, officially opened. It houses his massive global archive, which includes his original manuscripts, source documents, and translations into those 50-plus languages. It's a testament to his global literary journey.
And it serves as a beautiful tribute to his roots, doesn't it? It connects the jazz bar owner directly to the literary giant.
Absolutely. The building itself is designed to reflect his life. The library includes a coffee shop run by students called Orange Cat, a deliberate nod to his first jazz bar, Peter Cat.
I love that.
And even more significantly, it features a dedicated listening lounge where visitors can hear the vast collection of records accumulated by Murakami himself, over 3,000 works. The physical space is a statement. His literary legacy cannot be separated from his love of music.
Finally, we have to address the contradiction surrounding his tremendous recognition. He has this massive list of awards: the World Fantasy Award, the Tanizaki Prize, the Franz Kafka Prize, the Princess of Asturias Award in 2023. Yet he has a famously complex relationship with prizes and public attention.
It stems directly from the trauma of the Norwegian Wood success, the one that forced him into exile. While he accepts numerous major accolades, the sources point out notable rejections and withdrawals. He declined the 2007 Kiriyama Prize for reasons of personal principle.
Right.
And in 2018, when he was widely expected to win the alternative New Academy Prize in Literature, he requested that his nomination be withdrawn. He stated he wanted to concentrate on writing, away from media attention.
And that brings us to the perennial Nobel speculation, which haunts him every autumn.
He jokes about it. He says, "No, I don't want prizes. That means you're finished." This just reinforces the persona of the detached, committed artist who finds joy in the solitary process, the writing and the running, rather than the public accolades.
He doesn't want the spotlight that Norwegian Wood thrust him into again.
No. His rejections are his way of maintaining the controlled solitude that is so necessary for the automatic dwarfs to continue their work.
His career is a fascinating balancing act between staggering global acclaim and intentional personal solitude.
It truly is. His success highlights the unique appeal of his blend of Western literary styles and deeply personal Japanese sensibilities, all anchored by a dedication to craft that he maintains through his extreme running discipline. He's the introvert who became the most popular writer of his generation by writing the strange, complex stories that came to him, regardless of whether they were considered Japanese enough or marketable enough.
So let's quickly summarize the key knowledge nuggets we've extracted for you today. The learner. Haruki Murakami is a self-taught, jazz-loving runner who built his literary foundation not on traditional Japanese letters, but on Kafka, Vonnegut, and Kerouac, finding his initial inspiration at a baseball game. His signature style is marked by these surreal, flowing narratives, what others call magical realism, but what he calls simply the natural course of the story, assembled by his internal automatic dwarfs.
And most importantly, his career trajectory underwent a profound, conscious shift, evolving from intimate introspection and geographic detachment during his early success in the 1980s and 90s to a strong social and political commitment in response to real-world trauma like the sarin gas attack and global political crises, articulated most powerfully in his egg-in-the-wall humanism.
His lasting global impact stems from his ability to synthesize these disparate influences, Jazz structures, Western literary traditions, the I novel form, surrealism, and concrete historical trauma. This fusion is why his work resonates everywhere, offering a potent method for processing global chaos through deeply personal, often illogical, yet strangely universal narratives. He gives us language for coping with modern uncertainty.
We noted that Murakami stated his surreal books appeal most to people during times of tremendous turmoil and political chaos, like the Russia of the 1990s or post-Berlin Wall Germany. It suggests a comfort found in the acknowledgement of the world's illogic, a feeling that if the world doesn't make sense, at least the story of the world can still be beautifully, strangely told.
So, the learner, as you reflect on this deep dive into the man who talks about running, consider this final provocative thought drawn from the core of his philosophy. If his creative output is managed by the automatic dwarfs and his surreal settings reflect global political turmoil, what unexpected political or social walls in your own world, be they institutional, societal, or purely personal, might actually be best understood, not through reasoned debate, but by embracing the wild, illogical narratives of a 6 foot tall talking frog? Perhaps the only way to beat the system is to let your own automatic dwarfs run the show for a while.